Broadcasting from the far side of Enceladus, beaming in at the speed of light across the vast chasms of space, streaming directly into your brain, you're listening to episode 34 of the Spartacast League. Joining us today are your hosts, Jazzy Vidalia, that's myself, and Dark Moonpaw. Hey there, Dark, how's it going?
All is good. Good to be back, as always. It's fucking great.
Yeah, it is great. Yesterday we had the Nevada caucuses, and that was a lot of fun. Bernie Sanders has wiped the floor in Nevada, by the way. He got 46% of the vote last that I checked. He got 10 delegates. It was a winner take all. Second place was Biden at 19.6% and Buttigieg at 15.5. And if you actually include Warren in there, the second, third, and fourth place added up, well, it just barely was below what Sanders got.
It's quite impressive, really. I wasn't really expecting much good after the disastrous ordeal that was the Iowa caucuses, but I mean, with him already essentially being declared the winner by a significant margin of around 46.6% at around 50% reporting. This is only from previous statistics. You know, it's quite an interesting sign that he is a popular candidate over the other Democratic candidates who, let's be fair here, I mean, Buttigieg didn't even win the popular vote in Iowa, as we all quite well know. But it's a pretty good sign. And then it's also a good sign when you have other media figures comparing him winning to the Nazi invasion of France.
You're talking about Chris Matthews on MSNBC. Yeah, I remember that. And MSNBC had a meltdown last night. Pretty much almost all of their major commentary people, so Chris Matthews, James Carville, whatever his name is, goofy looking guy with the bald head. You've probably seen him on there. Has a really thick Southern accent. He was just going all in on the Russia stuff, by the way, which was just absolutely ridiculous. The media's been really pressing this Bernie Sanders like Russian thing that like the Russians really want him in, so they're releasing the internet trolls on him and stuff like that. Oh, you better watch out. And it's just a bunch of malarkey. It's not the same phenomena that happened with Trump where it was a definite quid pro quo, if you will. I hate to use that term because of the other things around it, but we'll get to that a little bit later.
According, funnily enough, to the Independent today, he's actually now being urged to resign after invoking such a historical comparison. I believe it was he with Brian Williams? According to this article, it talks about the comparison basically, but people are basically urging him to be fired because of how batshit this statement was. Especially when I mean MSNBC's user base is quite well. Conservatives used to think it was quite liberal. That's the funny thing, and yet
It's
you have a
very
host who
liberal
makes
boomer is
yeah,
what it is. It's the media outlet for
of course.
liberal boomers or the liberal elite, if you will. They have their chosen candidate now. It's very clearly Bloomberg, who is far
Ugh.
from anything that we would have ever in the past considered having values aligned with the Democratic Party, which is odd, but it goes to show just how far the Democratic Party has fallen in terms of like where they stand. They're very clearly a neoliberal party that has a faction in it that is sort of on the left, that is socially democratic.
So social
Right. They have a
democrats,
social democrat faction, but they're mostly a neoliberal party.
and they don't like the fact, in other words, that they have such a growing faction that has growing support, mind you, clearly. But I think that's a sign because well, at least the same backlash he's been getting. I mean, he got the same kind of backlash in Iowa, if I'm not mistaken, where I think some media presenters even expressed in complete utter despair, as if their country was being invaded, that he might actually make gains in Iowa, which, as we all know, he made significant gains in Iowa. But the same comparison, it has very similar parallels to what happened in the UK with Jeremy Corbyn, where people basically made vague parallels to shitty periods in British history, specifically the economy back in the early 20th century in Britain. People were essentially trying to say that, oh, if you elect Corbyn, he's gonna bring it back to 1970, even though that's when Thatcher was a thing. But all right. And then there's also the vague parallels of anti-Semitism, which also haven't died out. I mean, they're still using that, if I'm not mistaken, on Sanders, just not as blatantly as Corbyn, because Corbyn obviously wasn't Jewish. Sanders is, so it's harder to make that kind of statement on a openly Jewish candidate whose family was murdered in the Holocaust.
They try to do that with any candidate that goes after the wealthy. They will accuse them of being anti Jewish. If you start talking about the bankers
Yeah.
or whatever, due to stereotypes that are given, because, the next thing, that they ask is, oh, what do you mean by the bankers? Are you putting three parenthesis marks around that or not? And it's very disingenuous because like we're talking about class, and it is true, like when the right talks about things like the bankers or the elite, they are making anti-Semitic statements because what they want to
Yeah.
do is they want to replace that elite, which they perceive as being Jewish or Jewish influenced, by their own Christian elite or whatever, what have you. They're atheist, rational, or whatever. That's what they're trying to do. Whereas what we're trying to do is we are trying to create a more equal society by taking
Yeah.
the power of the elite, the bourgeoisie, and eliminating that as a class, not eliminating the people per se. Although in a revolution, that kind of stuff can happen because revolutions tend to get violent, but they don't necessarily have to be. But we're
Oh
talking
no.
about
If you look at
removing
history,
the
yeah.
power from the class, and that's totally different than wholesale exterminating a class of people based off of their religion, which is really what the right wants to do in this particular case. Because when they talk about the elite and when we talk about the elite, we mean two different things. And I think that that needs to be clarified because so many times I see, like in liberal media like MSNBC, they will take this accusation of anti Semitism and apply it to anybody that talks about the billionaires. But in a way, that particular criticism in and of itself is anti Semitic because it prompts anti Semitic feelings towards the billionaires. it,
Yeah.
it basically makes the insinuation that these people are Jewish. But the truth is that most wealthy people are actually Christian. The vast
I
majority.
mean, in America, statistically, I believe
Yeah.
so. Yes.
Especially in the United States, that's true. That the vast majority of the bourgeoisie are Christian, and especially if you include the petty bourgeoisie as well. I mean, then by far it definitely is. And so
I think in terms of that, it's important to note because again, the right used Corbyn as a scapegoat for a lot of the problems of the UK, and now we're seeing the same parallels with Sanders. Although it's much harder, I believe, for the American right because again, Sanders is an openly Jewish candidate with a very open
it
history.
is, and
I
so
mean, much
what
like
they're
Corbyn.
going for is the Russians, and if not the Russians, if people don't fall for that, it's his supporters are mean. They're nasty people. And the truth is,
Oh well, I think I'm not. If they think they're nasty, you should see me.
also, the truth of the matter is, I mean, if we're so nasty, why are we fighting for free healthcare for everyone? One of the big things about Sanders' healthcare plan is it actually doesn't exclude the rich. They kind of benefit from it too. They're not going to have to pay in at the counter or get a bill from the hospital, situation. They're going to be treated the same way that you or I are going to be treated. And I think that they're a little bit afraid of that because, like, when we talk about equal treatment, they think they're being brought down to our level. And that's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to create an atmosphere where everybody is treated in an egalitarian and just manner. That we're trying to tear down those barriers of entry to basic human necessities like healthcare, like housing, etc. And the rich see that as a threat because when they hear that, they're thinking, oh, everybody's going to be poor, and you can hear it in their rhetoric, right? So,
Yeah.
they have that failure of understanding right from the beginning.
Well, they don't understand, the concept of universal healthcare. I mean, a lot of people in the UK tried to make this argument against the NHS, but they seem to forget that the NHS was designed to benefit everybody. It wasn't designed simply to benefit the working class. Universal healthcare is a concept on its own in a capitalist society. It doesn't exist to obviously benefit one person. It exists, or one class, sorry. It exists to benefit as many as possible to improve not just the productivity of said society, but also its health standards. And I mean, as we've all seen in Europe, this is the defining standard. And statistically, it shows that it is a standard that needs to be held, and that the argument for privatized healthcare, it no longer exists. And I think that personally, the backlash Sanders, I mean, not just Sanders, but even AOC and Omar, who are big supporters of Medicare for all, the backlash they've been getting for the past while, with regards to this issue, it kind of showcases a big problem, I suppose, in American politics, and that is it's the inability to budge towards progress, even though said progress is objectively guaranteed to benefit everybody regardless of their
Right.
class.
And like I said earlier, I think it's kind of obvious where the Democratic Party, at least the Democratic Party elite, actually stand by choosing somebody like Bloomberg out of all of the people. I mean, because if you really think about it, like
Yeah.
Bloomberg coming in out of nowhere, spending over 400 million on ads, only to really get nowhere with it so far.
Oh,
It's
laughably nowhere.
laughably nowhere too. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. I mean, yeah, like Buttigieg has like a whole host of problems, and I would never support him. Biden is gross. Bloomberg is kind of on the level of Donald Trump. He's just the
Pretty
he's
close.
like diet Trump, and that's what's alarming about this is the fact that out of all the people they could have chose, even neoliberals,
They chose,
they choose the
well,
guy that
him.
wanted to ban sugary drinks and did ban sugary drinks, like the big gulps in New York City. He chose the stop and frisk. They chose the stop and frisk guy. They choose somebody that has a
Really?
consistent record of going after African Americans, and somehow they think that people are going to vote for this guy. And I can tell you that Bloomberg really didn't have a showing in Nevada. Obviously, when we go to South Carolina Saturday, he's not going to have a showing there because I really don't think black people are going to get out and vote for this guy.
And you're mentioning, South Carolina specifically, which, it will be Saturday, of next week at the time of recording. Yeah.
Yeah, it'd be around next week.
So I guess a lot of Bernie supporters, especially, and I mean, the reason that these results are also happening is because of the tireless activism that people are going through, and the fact that people actually went out of their way to contribute to the campaign from across the globe. Really, not financially, mind you. We're not Russian bots, folks. People have actually worked in the call centers for Bernie. They've called in. They've tried to rally supporters, and that's the reason we've had, in my opinion anyway, such a successful kind of result for this socially democratic candidate.
I think that the grassroots here has done a good job at getting the message out about what Bernie Sanders really stands for, and I think that that's also why we're seeing a backlash to the media. People are seeing what MSNBC is putting up. They're seeing what the Washington Post is putting up in the New York Times when they run articles that say stuff like don't pay attention to Sanders. Pay attention to the person that's going to come in second in the Nevada caucuses. When they have headlines that read
Yeah,
like that, that wasn't exactly what the headline read, but it was a paraphrase.
it basically was. Yeah.
When you have a headline that literally says that, like, people know that it's bullshit at this point. Like, people understand that the media is actively trying to drive people away. And so, like, it very much shows that, yeah, there is a complex within the media that is part of the Democratic machine. And it shows how corrupt the Democratic Party actually is. And we kind of knew this about the Republican Party. It was very well known that Fox News, Sky News in Europe, etc., the Murdoch network, was all in the hands of the Republican Party and conservative donors
It's
and what
fucking Skynet.
Skynet. Did I say Skynet or did I say Sky News?
Sky News. I'm just making big parallels.
I mean, it was obvious who was controlling that and what their message was. And I think that people are coming around and realizing that within the corporate media, you're seeing a lot of the same patterns with MSNBC, CNN, etc. And
Yep.
so all of a sudden, people are waking up to the idea that within the media, anything outside of this neoliberal spectrum, whether it's neoliberalism or neoconservatism, anything outside of that is just generally ignored or called quackery or kookery.
Yeah, and I think it showcases that the Democratic Party itself, it's almost having a crisis of identity because it wants to be progressive, but at the same time, it wants to be like fucking Tony Blair with the Labour Party. It wants to maintain some vague form of neoliberal conservatism, and yet it wants some progress. It just sounds ridiculous.
So that is because the Democratic Party, the elite within it, the people that run it, believe that they cannot continue and they cannot fight without the big donors. And so they have to kowtow to these big donors. And therefore, in reality, the Democratic Party is just owned by lobbyists and donors. So you have the
Yeah,
same exact companies that are sponsoring the Republican Party are also sponsoring the Democratic Party. You look at the candidates and who are a lot of them funded by. Once you get to the presidential race, both candidates are usually funded by Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, companies like Pfizer, etc. And it becomes a whole host of big pharma, big defense, and big finance.
and I think this is why, regardless of what some leftists may think of Sanders, I do think that he is important for what he does to the Democratic Party because he still shifts that window.
We're spending a lot of time talking on electoralism, but let's be real. Like, we don't really have a big workers movement within the United States right now. And having somebody like Sanders win an election gives that movement footing. It helps inspire people to get
Yeah,
off their ass and do something. And the last 3 years under Trump has actually been demoralizing for a lot of people. While it has inspired a lot of people to get up and move, it also has inspired a lot of people to just give up. And a lot of people have been driven into despair. And I've seen it online. We do need somebody like
yeah.
Sanders out there. Maybe not as president, and if he wins, I'm not saying that it's going to be perfect. I'm not that naive. I actually am very skeptical of electoralism, and anybody that's listened to the show for any long amount of time knows this. And I also understand that a Sanders presidency probably isn't going to be that great because let's be real, the financiers of the economy are going to sabotage the economy as much as they can once Sanders gets into office. When they say that, oh, like Sanders will destroy the economy, what they're really saying is we're going to destroy the economy because you guys didn't vote for the people
Yeah.
that, yeah, you didn't vote for the
The
right
right
candidate. And they
candidate.
would. They would absolutely, if Sanders beat Trump, destroy the economy if it's not already in the toilet by then. Because let's be real, even if the economy it manages to go up, up, up indefinitely for, like, let's say it has the capability to do it for 10 years, and I don't think it does, because we're on the longest bull run ever
Yeah.
in the history of in American history anyway. This is the longest bull run, and it is starting to show signs of weaknesses. The economy long term, just statistically speaking, doesn't have the energy to maintain this.
Oh, it's been on
Exactly, and it
life
has
support for a
been.
long time,
And
even in
then
Europe.
the other issue with that is that so much of, like, the economy is great stuff, just doesn't apply to regular working class people. And that's why you get people like Bernie Sanders rising in popularity. That's why we see AOC. That's why we see Rashida Tlaib and Ayanna Presley and people like that in Congress. And then running for Congress, we have people like Joshua Collins, that is an absolutely great person who I support and endorse. And I hope that he does actually win his race.
Because people want something that
Exactly.
people
These
stand
these
for.
people
People want
stand for something.
candidates with goals. They want them with personality. They want them with they want actual they want actual people with actual beliefs. That's the whole point.
And instead, we have the Democratic Party wanting to shove in our faces these elitist dickwads, the Bloombergs, the Buttigieg, the Bidens, the people that have in the past supported racist policies that are a part of elitist organizations such as the Council on Foreign Relations. Hello, Buttigieg. It's absolutely ridiculous, and it's so plainly obvious at this point that people are seeing through it, and people want
Yeah,
more, and they want an actual movement that cares about them. They want candidates that care about them, and that's what we're seeing. And right now, we need that structure in place within government because things are going to get very hostile very soon. In terms of the election here, I think we're going to see a lot of dirty foul play in the next 6 months here. Well, I think once we get to the Democratic convention, it's going to be a bloodbath there because are you familiar with what a super delegate is in
I believe it's a delegate that can pull in the largest
No.
number
So
of
a
votes,
super
if I'm not
delegate
mistaken.
is a delegate that is
Okay.
unpledged. They're generally a high level official within the Democratic Party, or they're like a governor that's a Democrat, or a congressman or senator or whatever. So they're basically people that the Democratic Party has awarded a delegate position to that's unpledged, which means that they can vote however they wish at the
Right.
convention. And 15% of all the delegates are super delegates at the Democratic convention. With the way things are going, if Sanders
Hmm.
doesn't pull off a landslide, because Sanders has to get more than 15%. Otherwise, or Sanders has to get more than 15% plus half. If the other candidates don't want to pool in, get together, and say, okay, we're all going for Bloomberg now, and then they swap over to Bloomberg, and then the super delegates come in and plop their 15 on top of that, all of a sudden you have a super delegate coup,
Yeah.
and Sanders is no longer the nominee. People need to really understand how the system works because it is inherently undemocratic, and it's kind of funny that the Democratic Party does this but the Republican Party doesn't. Oddly enough, they have their own system which is similar but not as bad, ironically enough. But this is something that like it definitely.
Can't believe you're
I know.
making this
I hate to
comparison.
actually put that comparison out there and say, "Oh, well, the Republican Party actually does something a little bit better," but I mean, it's true. Like they don't have this system. This is like some antiquated BS that like sounds like somebody in the 1800s came up with, so that the normies couldn't choose a president on their own, and if they did, and the elite didn't like it, they could just overrule it.
But so I guess what's on people's mind then the most, what's the immediate future right now is
Yeah, South
the
Carolina is
South
the immediate
Carolina caucuses, if I'm not
future.
mistaken.
But of course, like right now, I mean, there's even concern whether this all even matters. I mean, really, in my mind, because right now we're dealing with a very emboldened Donald Trump after the impeachment hearings essentially just failed and Trump was acquitted. And after Trump was acquitted, Friday evening, he fires three people from the White House. He fires the two Vindman brothers, Sondland, and he fires them for complying with the law. So he fired them because they answered the subpoena to
Mm.
go to Congress and make their testaments. And essentially what this is just absolutely something that renders me speechless. So So I mean, there's absolutely no precedent for this in U.S. history. This is very clearly playing very loose with rule of law here, to the point where I would even say that this act is illegal. This act was impeachable. He's very clearly stretching as far as he can. He also pressured Barr into reducing the sentence on Roger Stone as well from like 9 years to 40 months. And four of the prosecutors in that case just quit over that. They were just like, you know what, we're out of here. This is so. At this point, I think we're
Yeah,
reaching a point within the Trump presidency where we really have to wonder if complete rule of law is actually breaking down at this point and what happens when that occurs. Because what happens if Trump decides he's not going to leave after he loses the election? And people need to understand that as fanatical as that sounds and as extreme as that sounds, I don't think that it's impossible. And I really do think that what we're looking at here is a very real situation in which the president might refuse to leave because he knows that he's going to jail afterwards,
yeah.
especially if Sanders gets in or any of the other. I honestly think Biden might even go for it. Buttigieg might go for it because the country's tired of it. The country knows that Trump is a con artist. Yeah, there's no question about it. And the reality is that his support base is in reality actually pretty small and just very loud. And that's always how it is. That's always how it is. Like it's
That's his
always been
existence. I mean,
projection with the
nothing
right
to be
in
fair
terms
here.
of their own popularity. They always like to use terms like the silent majority, for instance. Like, oh, in reality, people
Just
really
very
agree
loud.
with us, but they just don't say it. But
They're
in
very loud.
reality, they're not a silent majority. They're just a very loud minority.
Especially his particular subsection. But I think again, considering we've seen how radical his supporters have gotten over the past while, and considering
I
how
mean, we've seen
this,
it over and over again. As much as they like to deny it, as much as they like to project that, oh,
yeah,
it's really the left and Antifa.
oh plenty.
When there's like literally no terrorist attacks committed by Antifa. By the way, I mean that's the funny thing. There's plenty. If you look at the far right, zero murders committed in the name of Antifa, but hundreds within the last 4 or 5 years committed by Trump supporters, committed by the alt right, committed by neo Nazis. And I think that's the big difference here.
Yeah.
And the fact that that's documented really goes to show. And if it's not the supporters, then it is the legislators. And right now, like Republican legislators have actually kind of been on a bit of a genocide kick where they actually are going after people in the United States, specifically transgender people right now. Like a whole slew of states, I believe it's about a dozen states, have submitted bills to their state legislature. All of the bills are essentially written by three foundations: the Heritage Foundation, the Alliance Defending Freedom, and the Family Research Council.
Sounds like the Three fucking
It is the
Stooges.
Three Stooges. And what's really funny is like Alliance Defending Freedom. Let's just soak in that name for a second. The Alliance Defending Freedom is
Uh,
and the Family Research Council, which advocates for strong families, by the way, are going out there.
oh yes, strong
They're
families.
going out there to these state legislatures with these drafts of bills and saying, hey, we would like you to limit the freedom of transgender people because they somehow are a threat to everybody else. Somehow. They can't prove it. They've never proved it. They've never once, like, the Alliance Defending Freedom, if that doesn't sound familiar, and if the Family Research Council doesn't sound familiar, and of course the Heritage Foundation should sound familiar for everybody, but if these organizations don't sound familiar, these were the same organizations that were pushing the bathroom bills last year.
What's it with these creeps and fucking bathrooms?
Exactly, exactly.
Like they're obsessed with bathrooms. Like, it's all it's
They're
been.
obsessed with what people should be allowed to do with their bodies. I mean, because they are authoritarian. And what
Oh,
is
yeah.
more authoritarian than telling somebody what they can or cannot do with their body? And this is true regardless if it's LGBT issues, if it's drug issues like cannabis. The legalization of cannabis is largely seen opposition by the Republican Party in the United States. And the few Republicans that are for it just all happen to have stock in cannabis companies. So it's kind of interesting
Yeah.
how that works out. That unless they have interest in in a business, they're against it. And so what we've actually been seeing here is like some of the bills here, like Florida, they put in like 4 bills, and one of them was a repeal of non-discrimination laws, like local ones that said like, oh, you can't discriminate against transgender people because there are a lot of like patchwork laws in place to do that. And I think that the state has like a very basic law protecting transgender people. They want to make it a felony to provide gender affirming care to youth, which is actually a trend among most of these bills. Most of these bills are focused on two different things so far this year.
Yeah.
The Alliance Defending Freedom and the Family Research Council and the Heritage Foundation, there are two big talking points this year, and you're going to hear it again and again if you've not already heard it, is going after doctors, going after people that provide transgender care. And we've seen it in South Dakota where a recent bill failed. And that bill was actually submitted by a representative Deutsch. And he,
Yeah.
if that name doesn't sound familiar, he also worked with these foundations last year for the bathroom bill to try to get that passed in South Dakota, and that didn't fly there. And one of the reasons that South Dakota is one of those hot states is because they want to get it in a deep red state to show that, oh, other deep red states can do this. So that's why we're seeing Florida, South Dakota. Kentucky has the worst bill, by the way, by far the worst bill.
Oh, it does.
Because
Holy
not
shit.
only okay,
I've
so
just
not
Yeah.
only do they go after doctors in Kentucky, they have a separate bill where they literally are trying to turn all state officials into a fucking like gender
A
Gestapo,
Gestapo. Gender Gestapo.
where if a state official suspects a minor of being transgender, they have to inform the parents. And the term state official is actually very loosely defined in here, and it doesn't even apply to just state officials. It applies to teachers, doctors, etc. So if you're a doctor or a teacher and you have a suspicion but fail to report it for whatever reason, you could be slapped with a felony. You could lose your job. And so
Yep.
all it would take is for somebody to just make the mere accusation, and all of a sudden it's malpractice. So
And it really does showcase the flaws in turf ideology. They suggest that they campaign for feminism, that they
they
campaign
campaign
for
for
the bodily
feminism and they
autonomy of
hate
women.
women. They they
Yeah,
they
they basically
they
hate women.
hate women
They don't care
because
about actual bodily autonomy.
yeah, they don't care about bodily autonomy. Yeah, they don't care about freedom either. They don't care about expression. What they care about is people confirming to their idea of femininity, and that is not feminism. That in and of itself is patriarchy, if you will. They're not the
It's about maintaining the gender
yeah,
binary.
they're not
Yes.
defending women. They're saying, "Oh, if your hair's too short, you can't go in this bathroom without me having to look down your pants to make sure you don't have a dick." That's not feminism.
And there was a video even going around of somebody breaking
Yeah,
into somebody's bathroom stall. Like, they called security and so on. It was
there are
ridiculous.
several videos online of
Oh,
this
several actually.
happening. But
Yeah.
yeah, there was one. It kind of blew up on Twitter, and it was actually a high school student that was taking video of this. They were in the
Uh,
stall. They locked themselves in the stall, and this teacher literally took the door off of the stall. And
uh,
that's the kind of people that we're dealing with here.
I think also, I mean, truth be told, I do think that media empowerment has definitely played a huge role. I mean, recently in the UK, we had good old fashioned Grey and Linehan, also known as Glinner, feces Glinner. Well, that was a hashtag that was going around for a while. But
I thought it was
anyway,
Feces
uh,
Caitlin Bennett. I'm sorry.
what does that mean? What the
That's
fuck's that?
Poo Poo Gun Lady.
Oh, that's who that is. Okay. Anyway, um, essentially, uh, the BBC have been getting a lot of slack as of late because they platformed Graham on essentially their night show at BBC.
Oh yeah, and then he went on to compare transgender care of
At BBC
youth
Newsnight. Yeah.
to Nazi experiments. Yeah, yeah, I heard about that.
Essentially, the presenter, a Sarah, if you will, he basically said, there have been a couple of parallels in the transgender movement. One is at the moment children are being experimented on with puberty blockers, which isn't really the case. I mean, there's no proof of that. For one, it's just nonsense. I mean, it's completely consensual for children to take puberty blockers. I mean, that's why they've been used for many transgender
There's a lot
children.
of misunderstanding about puberty blockers and how they work, and
Oh,
the right
loads,
wing is
loads. Some
doing this
people have no
on the
clue.
right wing is doing this on purpose. By the way, they are intentionally lying about what these drugs do and what they are, so that people will be afraid. They're intentionally spreading misinformation about what these drugs do, so that they can remove freedoms from people. Like we said earlier.
Not only that, but to remove any of the factual evidence by medical professionals, to platform people who don't know what they're talking about, who aren't even doctors, mind you, who have basically zero understanding of biology for that matter. And yet, the BBC got complaints recently because they essentially allowed him on to a very popular, evening show, which talks about serious issues. And I mean, the BBC, don't get me wrong, they've been getting a lot of flack as of late because of the absolute shit they've been platforming. I mean, it's been ridiculous. I mean, this whole notion of platforming these people who are emboldening anti-transgender hate campaigns, essentially. Well, not just that, but that's one infamous example. To make comparisons essentially to Nazi experiments for transgender children, it's just it's nonsense. And yet the BBC lets these people on. And I mean, even on the comments section of this very article I'm reading, there are people who are even saying he's right. And that's the funny thing. It doesn't matter how humiliated people like Graham get.
The facts don't matter to them, because the truth is about gender affirming care is once these kids receive these therapies, the rate of suicide goes down to par. Youth suicide of transgender people is around about 41%.
Yeah.
We know this is a very well recorded fact. The right loves to like flaunt this as well. So like
Oh well, they love
fucking
to they
they
they, they
fucking
love
love
to
this
they love to
because
flaunt it.
I
Yeah.
will not I cannot tell you how many times I've been in a chat room or whatever, and some right wing dipshit will look at my bio and see that I have that I'm trans in my bio, and then say and then make some comment about they can't wait till I commit suicide. Or they ask
Yeah,
me why
that's
I
always
haven't
the
killed
case.
myself yet, or some like snarky bullshit because they think it's
Well,
funny.
so they done the same. They done the same thing with autistic people as well. I mean, it's always the case.
And they absolutely do. And the funny thing is like there are transgender alt right people which like confuse the heck out of me, and the right does actually weaponize this stuff. Like they weaponize like
Well,
autistic
Blair White's an
people that
infamous
like
example of that.
that
You know,
believe in their bullshit. They also like promote that stuff. Like they'll promote stuff like Blair White because she repeats their talking points.
even though said talking points aren't
Or
based in
bullshit.
medical
They're
fact,
not evidence
instead,
based
yep,
at all. That's the thing.
yep,
And the fact of the matter is once these kids get puberty blockers, once they start going on to hormone therapy eventually, once they get all the gender affirming care that they need, the rate of suicide goes down dramatically. And dramatically to the point where it's almost to par with normal suicide
yep.
rates. It's a little bit above, and that's to be expected. And the reason the transgender people have a higher rate of suicide to begin with is because of how society treats them. If they were treated
Yep.
more equally, if they were treated with respect, then this wouldn't be an issue. This wouldn't be a problem.
And I mean, The point of the matter is as well, I think again, it's been obvious time and time again that the media have been emboldening such people, but I think a lot of the anti-transgender rhetoric that has been getting, a lot of platforming essentially in the past while, it has been the reason it has been able to spread so well is a result of the media. And I think in general it is a huge sign of the flaws, if you will, of, well, liberal democracy for that matter. Of this whole notion of platforming people, of allowing said people to say whatever they want, to basically spew whatever bollocks they want without any consequence, really, on live television, on a very popular program, in a way to embolden the belief systems of their supporters. And the truth of the matter is, regardless of the issue of free speech, the point of the matter is at hand. They are being given an open platform to spread hateful rhetoric that only causes
Well,
more
with the
harm.
media, it's all about ratings and money. So they're going to
Yeah,
platform
yeah.
whoever they think can get the eyeballs, who can get the views, who can get the ears, because they want people to see whatever ads they're dishing out. They want to make sure that whoever it is that's paying them money to run their ads gets their money's worth, so that they'll
Yeah.
come back to them and advertise on their network. And so if that means that putting Graham Lineham on television to spew his bullshit is going to get more views, they're going to put him on.
Oh, it does. It gets more clicks and more views, and that's because again, people see a famous person like that saying stuff like that, and they say, "Oh, I may as well check this out." But even it doesn't even have to be famous people. There's people who have been made
But can I
famous by spewing shit.
can
I
I be
mean,
real though?
let's be fair here.
Can I be real though? Like I want to be honest. I
Uh,
never liked Graham Lineham. I
yeah,
always thought he was a little bit of a
well, I didn't
dipshit.
either.
The only thing that like really ever got a laugh at me, there were a few jokes on the IT crowd, which I believe that's the show that he did, right? Was it the IT crowd or was it the Office? Because I know the Office is also written by a trans.
The IT crowd and
Okay.
Father Ted is what he's
So,
most known for.
yeah, I got a few laughs out of it, but to be honest, I really felt that it wasn't really all that like intelligently written or anything like that. Like a lot of it was like the same four jokes over and over kind of thing, like the same paradigms.
Well, Favre was just a cacophony of Irish
Yeah.
stereotypes. I'll be
So
perfectly
it
honest.
was all just like, to me, it felt regurgitated after a while. So to see Graham Lineham do this on Twitter and make the same statements over and over, to me, just looks like a behavioral pattern of an attention whore, which is what he is. And
Oh yeah,
pardon the language.
uh,
I mean, I do understand that some people are going to be turned off by that, but yeah,
I
yeah.
mean he is.
Give me a better
The
give me a
bottom
better
line.
term, listeners, please. Like, send your hate mail to me on Twitter, please.
Yeah, but the point is, he is part of that entire line of attention seekers who have been given such a platform to
The
spew their
grifting
shit.
right.
And I mean, it's the grifting right, yes. And the point is, in my opinion, where the left stands in these kind of issues, again, our goal should not only be to challenge these issues, but to also deplatform such people from the shit that they have been given. And I think that's why, I don't think 115 complaints, to be honest, to the BBC is enough for these kind of issues. I think that personally, the BBC should have gone a lot
Well, I
more
mean, I would
flack
love to
um,
file a complaint with the
from,
BBC, but
yeah.
the only problem with that is the BBC is not going to take my complaint seriously because I didn't pay the TV tax.
Well, not the complaint. Not definitely not the complaint. Well, don't even get me started on that shit. I mean, I'll be honest. This is just another reason, to be honest, to dodge paying your TV license. But I digress. The point is, the left should encourage deplatformation, regardless of where you stand on, allowing said people to speak freely. Because the truth is, freedom of speech, yeah, it exists. It doesn't mean there's no consequences for what you say. And the point of the matter is, these people should face consequences for what they say, because it's only causing more harm to people who've done nothing to them. That's the point.
Right. These people are going out there saying these things, and then people are getting attacked, and that's what's happening. And we've seen it live on video. Well, maybe not live, but we've seen it on video where people have been assaulted for going in the bathrooms. Cis people that are going into the bathroom of their born gender and of gender identity that they conform to. These people are being attacked too because oh they got man hands or they got short hair, they're too tall, like we said earlier, and that is a betrayal of feminism in and of itself. It's a betrayal of it's a betrayal of individual liberty if you really think about it, which the right claims to be all for. But then when somebody tries to go outside the box of what they want society to be, what they want society to conform to, when they actually try to use that liberty and that freedom, the right attacks it. So these people, even the libertarians, because they're just as bad at it as the rest of the
Ugh.
right, and I've seen it, in circles because I've seen libertarians complain about things like degeneracy in right wing chats. They're just as bad as all the rest.
Oh well, they are, but that's because they're fake libertarians, as I like to call them.
Anytime we see people try to actually use their liberties as a human being or as an adult or otherwise, anytime we see that, the right actually attacks it. And it doesn't matter if it's transgender. It doesn't matter if it's cannabis usage, like I'd said earlier, as an example. Just on a whole slew of different things. And we've seen it before, like in the past, with even like small dipshitty things. Like, remember the moral panic in the 80s over Dungeons and Dragons? Do you remember like the
Or Marilyn Manson in 1990.
from the mid 90s onward? Remember all the shit about video games? That wasn't liberals. It was mostly right wing. I mean, with the
Mostly
exception of maybe
rightists.
like Tipper Gore, which was Al Gore's wife. But yeah, nobody
Oh
cares
well,
about
she
Tipper
doesn't
Gore. Let's
count.
be real. Okay. So, but the vast majority of these people that were going after video games, which is ironic because like so much of the right now is like really into that, right? And you think that they would understand this history, but the biggest proponent against video games was Jack Thompson. And he's a social conservative. And
Oh,
he
back then,
went
definitely.
so far with it, he managed to get himself disbarred in Florida, which, yeah, getting
It's
disbarred in
impressive.
Florida is hard, okay?
How did he do it? It's really impressive. You have to ask yourself, how did that even happen? With regards to all of that, I do think, when I since I rambled on about the media, I do think we're also seeing, we're seeing the same parallels with media influence on public perception with regards to LGBT rights in the same mannerism as the recent coronavirus outbreak as well. I
Very
think we're
interesting
seeing
parallels
interesting
there
parallels there.
with in terms of behavior. Exactly, that there is a lot of racism that's going on with how coronavirus is being reported, how people are discussing it. People like to give it names like the Wuhan virus or the China virus, which thankfully the media has mostly stopped doing, with the exception of a few outlets. But in early reporting, it was definitely far more common, and it helped produce an environment which allowed people to create like the memes, like the bio suit memes and shit like that. And if you actually look at
Oh,
the if
and that's
you
very common. I mean,
it's usually
honestly,
a
if you
right
see
wing
anyone with
dipshit.
that, it's
Now there's
usually a
exceptions to
rightist.
this, and you should always be careful with generalizing people in that regard. But for the most part, most people that I've seen are either right wing or have right wing sympathies, or they're just ignorant. But if you actually trace that meme to its origin on the Chan boards, the actual original source of that like has like tons of freaking like racist comments all over it. And in pretty much every instance of it showing up, there are racial slurs geared towards Chinese people, which I'm not going to repeat on air or ever.
Or should you?
Yeah, exactly. It just goes to show that there is a lot of misinformation about how viruses spread, how diseases develop and form.
Well, not only that, but a lot of media has ignored the fact that the reason we're seeing a greater prevalence of cases throughout the world as of late is because of a revision in the diagnostic methodology of, you know
Right.
the
As diseases spread, we get better at finding out who has or doesn't have the disease. So they revise the numbers and the numbers jump up. And this happens pretty much every time an outbreak happens.
I mean, before they primarily used laboratory results to diagnose people based on differential diagnosis, obviously in a laboratory. But now, because of how great the threat has been, they've revised this procedure essentially by using a diagnostic analysis combined with lung imaging because the coronavirus affects your respiratory tract, obviously. So by using lung imaging, you're able to detect whether or not an individual is experiencing extreme respiratory problems, in other words. And that's why, in essence, this is coming from global news in China. This is why we're seeing a greater prevalence in that. It's not because the Chinese are spreading it.
I'm gonna
Okay.
be for real with you though, is that I'm actually kind of concerned about the coronavirus. I have a lung condition that would make me susceptible that if I caught it, I would probably die. I got bronchitis about 2, 3 years ago, really bad.
Yeah.
Although I'm recovered from it, I still have the complications, like the coughing. I still have like minor lung pain and stuff like that. And so like I don't have the infection anymore. I'm cured of the infection, but like I'm scarred for life for having
The
this.
damage is still
And
done.
the
And
damage
the
is
point is,
done, and it hurts. But if I were to get the coronavirus, I would probably be one of those people that would die from this. So like
yeah.
I understand that there's a concern and there's a fear. But also, I understand that one, the probability of me catching it is fairly minimal, and the probability of me catching the flu and dying from the flu, given my condition, is far greater than getting the coronavirus.
And the truth is, we saw the same scaremongering by the media before. We saw it back in 2014, I believe, with
We
the
see it
Ebola
every few
virus.
years. I remember in high school when SARS was a thing, and they said that SARS was going to be this deadly pandemic, and it never panned out, and everybody was panicking. And while coronavirus has done more spread than SARS, SARS was actually more deadly. But the deadliest of the
Yeah.
coronavirus group wasn't the novel coronavirus that we have now. It wasn't SARS, it was MERS.
Yeah.
And if you caught MERS, you were fucked. There were reports at one point that I think like 60% of the people that got it died,
hmm
compared to right now, I think it's still sitting at about 2% of people that catch coronavirus actually die.
Yeah.
And most of those people either have lung issues, respiratory issues, they're really old or really young. And so once you understand who is at risk, you understand whether or not you need to take precautions, whether or not you need to worry. But also the thing with like the whole China thing is I see a lot of like anti-China rhetoric surrounding the coronavirus. And while there are stuff that they are doing that I really do criticize, like I don't think it's right to forcefully lock people and weld them into their houses. But also, this is the result of just a widespread panic. The government doesn't know what to do. They've never
Yeah.
really had this happen in China in modern times.
And to give them credit, they've basically been building
And
hospitals
they
that have
they
only
have
taken
they
to
actually
build.
have the
Yeah.
rate at which they've been building hospitals and whatnot. That's pretty impressive. They are taking it seriously, and there are things that they're doing that's good, and there's things that they're doing that is bad, very bad.
And it's only materialist for people to criticize certain aspects of the government's decisions. But the truth is,
I definitely do think that yeah, there's always room for criticism, right?
yeah.
But you need to make your criticisms valid, and you need to make sure that you're not like concern trolling or anything like that.
And you also need to be wary of context because let's be fair here. The reason we're seeing so much anti China rhetoric combined with the coronavirus is obviously because of Trump's trade war combined with the rise of xenophobia.
Also, yeah, xenophobia and also the misunderstanding of cultures there. So,
Yeah.
social expectations of how people act are totally different in China. Things that we would consider authoritarian in China are considered social expectations that people gladly do.
Yeah.
And that's where people like get hung up over this. Like when you see like somebody being locked in their own doors in China, like as weird as this sounds and as creepy as this sounds, and this would never fly in America. This would never fly in the West,
Oh
for
no.
obviously. But a lot of these people aren't being forced to do this, and that's what they're not telling you. Some of these people are literally saying, going to the authorities or contacting them, letting them know that they're worried or concerned that they might have it. And they're asking. That's the weird part. I mean, like, yeah, I kind of don't get it too. I'm gonna be honest. It puzzles me that why anybody would willingly do that, because I just wouldn't go out the house, right? I mean,
Yeah.
I wouldn't go that far. A lot of the different ways in which they handle things, like they were using drones with speakers on it to tell people, outside walking around without masks, to go back home, put your mask on. And yeah, in the US, that would be fucking creepy. But in China, their culture it didn't develop the way our culture did. And that's not to say
Oh,
that
and
they.
it developed quickly and
Right.
much
And so like
much
when
differently.
when we make these criticisms, we have to come around to understanding the culture behind it before we start just attacking something. And we have to understand the whys and hows. And I don't think that a lot of people that are making criticisms fully understand what they're saying, because they're saying it within the mindset of a Westerner and not looking at it from the perspective of somebody living in China. And that's not to say that everybody in China accepts that as the status quo. And that's not even saying that it is acceptable per se. I totally disagree with the practice of locking people in their houses. I think that's bizarre.
Yeah.
But also on the flip side, I understand why it's happening. And I think that we can criticize that without being racist about it, but we have to understand where that criticism comes from. And so much criticism of China and so much of the reporting that's being done on the coronavirus in general is coming through this lens that has this inherent bias in it.
There's no internationalism, and I think
Right.
the left has a problem with that too in places where they refuse to, or at least certain subsections refused to look at it from the perspective of various people who live in China and understand the social and political context in which these events take place in. So I think if people are going to genuinely criticize China for it, I think at the very
That's
least,
one of the reasons, like, when I read criticisms of China, I like to look at things like the Philippine Communist Party or the Naxalite pages, because they do give great criticisms on China that aren't from a Western context, where
yeah,
they say a lot of similar stuff that you might hear from the West, but they say it in a different way and they contextualize things in a different manner. So you're not getting like CIA talking points. You're not getting any of that. You're getting an actual cultural analysis, but you're also getting it from a different cultural window. And so that's one of the keys. Like when we start talking about criticizing China, is how do we do this without being racist? How do we talk about things like the coronavirus without making racist statements? Those are important questions that need to be asked, and we don't really have a lot of good models for it, but there are places that we can look at and we could say, hey, other communist parties don't seem to have a problem with being able to criticize something without going down that road. Why do we in the
yeah.
West have such a problem? And I think part of that problem is that we're looking through it through cultural lenses. We're looking at it through ideology. We're looking at it through Western propaganda, and we're not looking at the material reality. We're not looking at the cultural reality or the history behind anything.
No.
And that's where we have to start looking. If you really want to criticize China, then you have to look at it from that standpoint. You have to look at their culture, you have to look at their history, and you have to look at the material conditions on the ground. And you can't just dig up.
Don't fall into idealism,
Right.
essentially.
Yeah, don't fall into idealism. And I see a lot of idealism surrounding the coronavirus stuff. And it's the same xenophobic, racist crap that we always hear about China, that, oh, like people got it because they ate bats or whatever. And
Yeah.
no, we actually know that that's not where it came from.
Not the case,
Yeah,
but you know.
exactly. Like it just it creates a narrative that's divorced from reality and then becomes dangerous because people then try to act on those ideological assumptions or racist assumptions, and when they do, they don't actually fix the problem. They just create more problems in the process.
Mhm.
And right now, like one of the big things that Asian Americans are seeing right now is they are seeing people act towards them in a xenophobic manner
But we're
over
seeing an increase,
right
a
over
rise of
the
racism.
coronavirus. They like
Xenophobia has been
people like make this assumption that because somebody looks Asian now and they have a cold that they might have the coronavirus or some shit. And it's
yeah.
bullshit. It's like they think that every Chinese person living in the United States has connections with China. Some of these people are fourth generation immigrants, for God's sakes, never been to
Mhm.
China in their life, don't speak a word of Chinese. It's ridiculous. And people need to understand that being afraid of somebody because they're Chinese, and now because of the coronavirus, there's this idea, they're dirty somehow because that's really what it is. It's foreigners are dirty. That's all it
It's
is.
about control. It's about
It's
control.
an age old trope. It is. It really is an age old trope. But it's just it's ridiculous.
So the overarching theme really is about control. With both matters of the LGBT stuff and with the corona.
Yeah, like you said, like the overarching like thing that we're seeing here, especially with the right, is control. And right now, one of the big criticisms, and this kind of hooks into both the coronavirus and LGBT in kind of a in a very weird way, is our surveillance culture. And I think that everybody needs to be concerned about the surveillance culture in the United States. Because, like, while we sit here and we criticize China, after I talked about criticizing China for the last 15, 20 minutes, ironically, now we're going to criticize the US. So we often accuse China of being this massive surveillance state. But what we don't realize is the surveillance apparatus in the United States is in many ways as good, if not better, and more encompassing than what it is in China. We have more security cameras and networks.
But the thing about China is people are even fucking aware of it. Like even people who live in China know about it. Americans don't.
The difference is that most Americans are vastly ignorant about the surveillance networks that are surveilling pretty much every part of their life at this point. And that's why we don't see the same kind of criticism towards the United States in terms of surveillance as we do China. Because if people knew how the United States, our local governments, corporations, companies, etc., are watching us, tracking our behaviors, categorizing things, people would be damned fucking disturbed at the amount of data that these companies have, the amount of data that police could pull up on people, the amount of data that exists about you is ginormous,
Especially Amazon, which
especially
have been
Amazon. And
which have had an infamous ordeal with their ring, I
yeah,
believe.
Amazon Ring, which is their doorbell system that they wanted people to install on their houses. And it had some great features too. Like, for instance, the video feed can go directly back to your local police department so that the police can use the ring system to see where criminals are in a particular spot or where people are, kind of thing. But we all know that that's just going to be used for doing what police normally do. And we all know that a
Get
lot of
easy
times,
paychecks.
well, we also know that a lot of times, when police say criminals, it's not necessarily criminals that they're
It means
looking
somebody who
for.
had weed a
Exactly.
lot of the time anyway.
And the Ring system was also abused by Amazon and Ring employees as well. And in fact, Mozilla did a great freaking report on that and found that Amazon Ring was one of the most insecure systems that they tested out of like 70 like Internet of Things cloud devices, by the way. It was towards the
Ugh,
bottom. So not only does this system spy on you, send your stuff to Amazon and Amazon's Ring division, like in Ukraine. Yeah, that's lovely, isn't it?
truly.
And to the police. Not only is it sending all your information there, the system is hackable, very easily hackable, and anybody can get in.
Yep, we've seen the same things with the UK. Recently they've been testing new facial recognition software in London, and it's been, needless to say, it's absolutely fucking terrifying.
Didn't they put up like
Um,
signs saying that like you could actually block your face, but then like somebody actually did try to block their face and they arrested him? Like, didn't wasn't that like a thing that
yep,
happened? Like,
yep, that's correct. Yep, yep,
I remember like reading a story like they put it out there, then they put a sign on there saying that they were using the technology, and they said that you have the right to cover your face. And I don't think that that's when that person was arrested. I think that before they were actually trying it out, and they were trying it in an area where they hadn't posted it, and somebody had their face covered because of that concern, because they knew what the devices look like or something, and they arrested the person for covering his face over the area where they were using it.
well, I mean, the Metropolitan Police in London have started using it about 4 weeks ago. It's ridiculous. I mean, the Met have basically said that it's 70% accurate at spotting wanted suspects and falsely, and only falsely identifies people in 1 in 1,000 cases. But people have actually, but actual professionals have found out that it's only verifiably accurate in just 19% of cases.
19% of cases. That's like not even a
Yeah.
majority. I bet a
No.
person could do a better job than these systems. I mean, that's the thing is
Yep.
this is very similar to what we heard with Palantir, which is actually owned by Amazon, and it's a facial scanning recognition system. And then there's also a new one that's out as well called Fairview, if I recall correctly. And Fairview is
Hmm.
used by police departments. And it was this guy that created this company where he scanned social media, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, pretty much everything. Also scanned like media sites and stuff like that. So things like the New York Times, local newspapers, etc. And he created a
Yep.
database of faces and then categorized them all together so that like using facial recognition software. And police, if they have a picture of somebody they're looking for, they could scan it in, and in theory it'll pop up with who it is that they're looking for. The problem is we don't know exactly how accurate it is. The reporter that was actually working on this, one of his concerns is that because he was working on the story with the guy, and the guy knew beforehand that he was coming to him, that he could like
Yep.
fake the results, which is, it wouldn't be surprising, given the history of these kind of companies. So we have multiple companies out here trying to do this, but on top of that, we already have one of the largest security camera networks in place in the United States, spread out over multiple cities. Pretty much
Yep.
every major city in the country has its own security camera network. And some of these security camera networks, like even store security cameras, are plugged into this. They have pathfinding technologies now, so they can they can actually track you where you go day to day. For instance, they know where the
Hmm.
most like traveled areas are, like the most traveled patterns. One of the things that they did in one of the cases where they had one of these systems implemented is they were actually able to figure out that somebody was selling drugs out of their house by just
Right.
looking at how many people were going into this person's home and going to this person's house. But the thing is like also like, what if he wasn't selling drugs? What if he was selling something legal and had a business license to operate or something like that? Then the police would have just tore down somebody's legitimate business. And when you live in a city, that's an easy mistake to make.
Yep.
And so they literally went off of zero evidence other than traffic patterns. And that's really what should be disturbing about this, is that we're using this evidence, in some cases very loose evidence. And how many times has a mistake like this happened where police have suspected something based off of video camera evidence that we don't hear about because they had to drop the case?
Oh, loads.
Exactly. And the thing is that, like we were talking about with China, in China the difference is everybody knows about their surveillance system. It's publicly disclosed. In the United States, it takes investigative journalists to figure out what is going on, what is the extent of these systems, how do they work. It takes investigative journalists working months over the course of numerous stories to figure out exactly what this is. Like, The Intercept has a ton of articles on camera systems, surveillance systems, how they work.
Then there's also then there's also drone
Yeah,
operators.
and then there's the drones that are actually going to be tested next year in San Diego as well. Which The Intercept also did a report on that one. But the San Diego Tribune, I believe that's the local paper there, did a great story, a very detailed story on the fact that they actually wanted to use a civilian version of the Predator B drone, I think it's called Sky Guardian.
Uh,
And essentially, what this thing is
it really
is
does sound like Skynet.
it does sound like Skynet, as this thing is going to be a surveillance device that they just put up there to monitor people. Yet another piece in this surveillance puzzle that will have possibly facial recognition and all the the trappings that any modern device would probably have. And if it doesn't, then they're probably working on a version that does. And the thing is what makes this very interesting is the fact that the government, or rather not the government, but the company that makes this, which I believe is Raytheon, if I recall correctly, with the Predator drones. The company that makes this has clearly been working on this and clearly been working on a civilian version of this for years. And we know this because NDAA 2012, this was passed under Obama, this was 2012, actually reduced the limitations on civilian drones that allowed this to even be possible. And after this happened, all of a sudden, for a period of years, over the central US, there were weird UFO cases that match exactly this device. That once you actually look at the cases, it was in Colorado, Nebraska, Iowa, all the plain states. You started seeing these devices being tested, and people were reporting these into the National Center for UFO Research, or whatever it is that catalogs this. And so they kind of got the what's up on it too. And it's very clear that even though these people are untrained observers, and yeah, their stories do sound a little bit crazy because they are untrained observers trying to describe something they don't understand, they've never seen before, and saying that, oh,
And yet they seem to be
yeah, they seem to
pointing
be
it out
pointing it
though.
out,
Yeah,
and
that's the
people are
thing.
calling them crazy. They're saying, "Oh no, these are a bunch of rednecks out in the middle of the United States. I bet they just saw some natural lights, or they were just drinking some natural lights. And they sit there and they joke about them. They call them morons and everything else in the book. And then we go
Yeah.
and we look back at the reports, and oh my god, they're testing fucking drone, and they were doing it in secret, and this was private companies working with the U.S. government to do this, because the U.S. government had to know, because it was in their freaking airspace. Because you don't just put something out there in U.S. airspace and not tell the U.S. government that this is what you're working on, right? So
We're seeing that have a big influence, if you will, over the political landscape. And again, it seems that the establishment wants to maintain more control over more radical movements, in my opinion, because
over more radical movements, yeah, exactly. And that's really what I think that these machines are going to be used for, is it's yet another surveillance device for going after radicals, going after minorities. It's very clear that Border Patrol would probably fucking love one of these devices, right?
yeah,
They could just release swarms of drones, larger and smaller ones. And they have been testing smaller ones, by the way, because some of the UFO swarm sightings that have been spotted, they're smaller devices, by the way. They're not necessarily the Sky Guardian. The Sky Guardian
right.
matches some of them, but there are also ones where they've seen like 10 and 20 lights in the sky as well, and they fit like the quadcopter description of the smaller drones, which are kind of scary in their own right. Because actually, if in the show notes, by the way, I actually have a link to, if you like sci-fi horror films. I got a sci-fi short here that actually discusses the danger of these. The full danger of these is that once you start combining all these technologies, all it takes is one rogue company out there to put it all together, and suddenly you have a device that is a weapon, that has facial recognition, has cameras that can scan social media, and is a very dangerous attack bot. The video is called Slaughter Bots. I highly recommend that you check it out. You'll probably shit your pants
If
and
you don't plan
be,
on sleeping tonight.
yeah. Yeah, if you don't plan on sleeping tonight, I highly check it out, because in this video they show how these could be used in a manner that is more dangerous than nuclear weapons. Because with a device like this, they could go out and they could find every LGBTQ activist, they could find every transgender person out there and kill them. In the wrong hand, this technology is so dangerous that it really shouldn't exist. This is on the scale of nuclear weapons, as the video pointed out. And people should be very afraid that this is what companies like Raytheon, Northrop Grumman, and stuff like that, they're really salivating to do this. They can't do this right now because there are international laws that this would
Yeah.
violate, but they're really chomping at the bit for the US government to give them the go ahead to do this so that they can use this in other countries. And then, just like how the MRAPs and the LRAD systems and all these other military technologies that were used like during the Iraq War or developed to be used overseas, just like those technologies came over to be used for crowd control purposes, we're going to see these technologies like the Sky Guardian, which is the unarmed version. And that doesn't mean that they can't put some sort of armament on there. They could put tear gas canisters on it and have them drop them from the sky. I mean, they could get real fucking creative with this shit, right?
Yeah.
And people are misunderestimating, to quote Bush, misunderestimate. Why did I say that? People are
Underestimating.
underestimating the capability of these weapon systems, and they are weapon systems. That's what they are. That's what they were originally designed
I don't know
for.
if I'd say it's just underestimation. I think it's more that people they don't really know what to do. I think a lot of people are afraid, but they merely accept them as a change, but they don't know what to do. And I think that's the resultant of a lack of strategy and a lack of adaptation
Exactly.
to
And
the
we
current
need to
environment.
come up with, what are we gonna do when these things are released? Because, and when I say these things, I'm talking about Sky Guardian, not the fictional slaughter bots, by the way. Is
Like,
what are we gonna do when these devices are released and maybe some of them do have, if you will, non-lethal weapons attached to them? I mean,
make it
imagine
much better.
imagine how these devices would have been used during the No Dapple protests, the pipeline protests, or even like to bring it forward to now. Imagine if the Canadian government had a few of these and decided to use these against the shutdown Canada protesters, against the Wet'suwet'en peoples, and they would absolutely be tempted to do so. And I think a contingent of the right would be absolutely excited if they did. Dark?
Yeah, no, they definitely would be. I do think that in general, a lot of them would take advantage of the new technology and they would use it to, well, halter the efforts of political opponents where possible. And if not, they would definitely advocate for its use, at least the more quote unquote authoritarian right. But even the quote unquote libertarian right, I don't know if they would advocate it per se, but they would definitely make excuses for it if it would halter the efforts of, well, socialists.
15, well, not 10, well, 15, 20 years ago under Bush, I would imagine that the libertarians would have lost their fucking minds over this. They would be screaming about how dangerous it is. But I don't think the libertarians of today would.
No.
I think that they would apologize for it. They would somehow make the excuse that it's somehow necessary or whatever for the preserve civilization or whatever bullshit that they give. Because really, like I said earlier, they don't care about liberty. And that's just the fact. That's one of the reasons why, like, when the right talks about liberty and freedom, I cringe. I fucking hate it. I really don't even like using those terms in political context because
Well, the
they
way they
become
use it
meaning.
is
Well,
pure idealism
it's
anyway.
idealism, but also like it's, in a way, it is dog whistling for them, because when they say those words, they don't mean those words in the same context that you and I would, say them
It,
if
it
we
means
meant
for
them.
white people.
Right,
primarily.
right. It means it's for white people, right? I mean, that's the context in which they're working in. It's for rich people. It's for wealthy people. It's for people to exercise their privilege. That is what freedom and liberty is. It's the exercise of privilege in their contexts. And when we say it, we mean something different.
Yep.
So when we talk about freedom and liberty, we're actually talking about freedom and liberty that matters. We're talking about individual freedom. We're also talking about human rights. We're talking about being, respected, treated with dignity. All of that stuff is related. And you can't have freedom and liberty in a society where disrespect and mistreatment is rampant. You can't have freedom and liberty in a society where the rights of people are trampled, because then you don't have rights. You just have
And I
privilege.
think this ties in primarily to the overarching notion of strategy in this regard. What do people do to not only to spread awareness for this, but also how do we take the concerns of everyday people and apply them to coherent strategy?
One of the things that like I'm really big about, I've been really getting into lately, in theory, and I've been wanting to talk about on the show for a while, is mass line. I think that it's one of the most important principles within leftism and certainly within Maoism.
Oh, definitely.
And it's a principle within Maoism that's interesting because it's not restricted to Maoism. Like
Basically,
other
plenty of movements
tendencies,
use
yeah,
it.
yeah, other tendencies use it even if they don't necessarily even have a name for it. And why are my neighbors having sex? And God fucking damn it.
What?
This is what happens when you do a show live, folks. I mean, well, not live. This is what happens when you record a show. Anything can happen, right?
I'm a bit concerned for your well-being now.
Oh no, I'm fine. I'm fine. Luckily, the microphone's not picking any of this up. At least I'm not hearing it on the monitor.
Oh,
It's,
thank
it's
fuck.
great, isn't it? It's great.
That's
You never know,
great.
right? Um,
Oh,
but hey, let's talk about that. So first, like the basics on mass line. Like, what exactly is it? So the mass line isn't an organization. It is a process. It's a tool. So a lot of people like to confuse mass line with the Vanguard Party. It's vastly different.
Vanguard's
It's
vastly
also, the
different in
difference
places.
is a Vanguard Party can be one implementation that can be used with a mass line, and within Maoism kind of is, depending on which version of
Mhm.
MLM you really want to use. Because some people will stress a Vanguard Party, some people won't, and I think that this is
But it's not a necessity.
right, right. So it's not a necessity. Let's get that out the way. So firstly, and then secondly, a lot of people, because it is associated with Maoism, will assume that it's authoritarian, which it also isn't, or that mass line is some form of gatekeeping.
It definitely isn't because, I mean, if I'm not mistaken, Massline was developed as a criticism for gatekeeping.
Mass line was, yeah, exactly. It was created literally to address gatekeeping. So it was, instead of gatekeeping with the Vanguard Party, how can we create organizationally a method, a tool that allows people to be brought into the movement, to grow like the Vanguard Party, or grow the movement in general, to get people educated, to get people involved in wanting to do something. And the
Yep.
way that you do that is with your organization. You use your organization, whether it's the IWW, whether it is a Vanguard Party, whether it is any leftist organization, really, is you do exactly what we talked about on the last 30 something episodes that we've been on air. You serve the people, but how do you do that? And that's a process, right? So when Mao said like serve the people, like what exactly did he mean? And he gave a tool that we could use to do this. And it's a very scientific, very methodological tool, and it's very simple. So the first thing is let's say like you have an organization that has a goal. You work with the people on the streets to create a plan to implement that goal. Because first thing, your goal needs to be in line with the people. So you look at what the
Yep.
people want, look at what the people need, and you say, okay, we're going to create a goal to do this. So,
You base your actual goal on the strategies and, ideas
right,
presented by the everyday people.
you look at the material conditions, create a plan, You get input from the people before doing anything. You have a discussion. Then you create the plan. You format out what you're going to do. And then once you have everything formalized, and during this formalization process where you're talking with people, during all of this, you're bringing as many people into the conversation as possible and into hopefully your organization. And then you go and you execute that thing with the people. And so every time you do this, every time you create this loop, you're creating a positive feedback loop where you're including more and more people into your processes. You're growing your organization.
You're not limiting people based on
Right.
their own predispositions. In other words, you're actually trying to take their ideas on board and to apply those ideas in the material reality in which they find themselves in. So, in other words, you are avoiding the limitations of gatekeeping, which a lot of leftist circles, not just Marxists, many circles fall into, in my opinion. And I think, to be perfectly honest, if a lot of leftists were able to get out there and serve people in this mannerism to actually take on the populist strategies that people present, because people aren't stupid, people are smart, and people know their own weaknesses, they know their own strengths, and they know the material reality around them. They've tried to adapt themselves to them. But in order to bring people into your movement, you have to actually help them. That's the point.
Right. And actually, one of the best resources on the basics of mass line principles and how it's used, there's a really good article over at
Revolutionary Initiative, I believe.
yes, Revolutionary Initiative. Thank you. There's a really good article over at Revolutionary Initiative that actually has a really cool diagram as well, that actually pretty much says or diagrams out what we said. And the diagram is actually a two-part diagram if you look at it. And what it is at the bottom, you have the action level. And then at the top part of it, you have the reflection level. And at the bottom, of course, is you start at the bottom with do, for instance. And you go, if you want to solve something, you look around, you think, you get input, and you plan. And then you take that plan and you're right back down to do. And then
Yep.
you continually do this cycle, bringing in more and more people, more and more input. And I really like that diagram because it shows the democratic process in a way that's very digestible. And so I highly recommend that if you take a look at anything in our notes, check out the What is a Mass Line article by Revolutionary Initiative. It's actually one of the better resources on the mass line and taking it, breaking it down, and showing what it actually is.
I'd also like to shout out another very good leftist podcast that talks a lot about theory in a much more digestible mannerism. Revolutionary Left Radio. They do a lot of
Oh yeah,
theory
I
based
love
podcasts. In fact,
Rev Left Radio. Actually, Brett O'Shea is actually one of my favorite commentators and podcast hosts. Actually,
oh, they're great.
th-
They're great.
there's something just very relatable about how he can explain things. By the way, he's just an amazing person. I've been a fan of Rev Left Radio for a long time, so like I'm glad that you actually gave that shout out. Absolutely big fan of them, and I hope Brett, you're listening. I actually would like you to come on the show sometime, maybe chat a bit or something. That would actually be fun. Would you be down for that, Dark? If we got Brett
Oh,
on the show?
I'd love it. As a good old Irish person, yes, I would. I'd love it. You definitely go give them a listen. They definitely talk about theory a lot more than our show, in my opinion. They digest it in a way that's very, very,
I
very
really do
easy
want
to
to
understand, I
talk
think.
more about theory on the show, to be honest, because I think that we do ignore a lot of theory for current events, and I think that both of those kind of things are important. It's good to stay informed, but staying informed is two parts. Like, you got to have the events, what's going on, but then also you kind of have to have like the
The
theory,
methodology.
methodology. The understanding, and so I would really like to do more theory on the show. Not just Maoist theory in general, but just theory. Like like one week we might talk about syndicalism or something like that. and some principle within that. But this week, just because it is my favorite, it's the one that I wanted to start with. Mass line is honestly, I think it's the tool that the left can use to get people in the door, because it's a tool that allows everybody to come in and voice concern in a way, as long as they're not concern trolling or anything like that, get input in the process, and then realize that leftist ideology is about democracy, because that's really what this is. This is an exercise in creating a new democratic
An
process.
actual workers' democracy, not a facade of democracy.
Right, not electoralism.
Yep.
In this particular case, this is creating an alternative, a revolutionary alternative to electoralism. It's showing that there is another path that we can take, and it's one that we need to practice on, because even if Bernie Sanders makes it to the presidency, like I said, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be good. Things are probably going to get pretty tight, pretty harsh, pretty fast, because let's be real, the people that control the economy, if you will, they're probably going to want to sabotage it. They're probably going to want to crash it and consolidate, because that's really what happens during a crash, is the wealth just gets consolidated into fewer hands, which is why everybody's so poor during a recession.
Yep.
We look at this and we have to ask ourselves, what processes are available, and this is one that works. It works regardless if you're an anarchist, regardless if you're a Maoist, regardless if you're a Marxist Leninist, because it is scientific.
And it's simple. You've probably used it without even
Yeah,
realizing.
and you use it without realizing it. But when you implement it knowingly, when you implement it knowing that this is what you're doing when you implement it as part of the plan itself and you're self-aware of it, it becomes a tool that you can harness, versus something that is just part of the process, that's just kind of there in the background and vague and mysterious.
Yep.
That once we give it a name, we can address it and improve it. And it becomes a scientific process versus something that is just there, a phenomena, and unnamed thing.
Mm-hmm.
And like you'd mentioned earlier, that you had said that it's not just restrictive to Marxism, Leninism, Maoism, that we've seen anarchists use it. Would you be able to
Yes.
give some examples of that, actually?
I mean, you see anarchists often. I mean, that's why I admire a lot about anarchists, for example, because they're very practical. We see it a lot, very often. I mean, they're on the streets actually talking to people. For one, they're actually out there listening to people's concerns, and they're actually taking people's concerns and transforming them into coherent strategies. We see that a lot with the anti-fascist action movement, for example, and at the same time, you also see it a lot in black bloc tactics. I've seen that quite often with the you know of the anarchist book fair movement over in the UK, for example. Which was essentially a movement that was designed to, well, it still exists. It's designed to essentially provide books to prisoners, because one of the problems with the prison system in the UK presently is prisoners aren't actually given enough literature to learn or to read. And what anarchists do is that they listen to the concerns of prisoners in prison. They take those concerns and transform them into strategy. And in this case, it was a lack of reading material within prison systems. And what anarchists did was they campaigned for providing such literature to prisoners, revolutionary literature for that matter as well, especially. And in that sense, it was able to transform the lives of many individual prisoners. Anna Campbell was part of that very movement. I cannot remember the name of it specifically, but she was part of that.
I asked that because I actually had an example myself. So in my area, we have quite a few different anarchist projects in our community here in Eugene. One of them is called the Share Fair. And what the Share Fair does is they set up, it's usually in a Methodist church that's downtown. And what they do is they work with homeless people to find out what needs need to be provided, and then provide those particular needs. And so like the Share Fair in and of itself, will oftentimes have like various booths up, and it's exactly what it sounds like. Like they go in and like we have like the brigade, which is usually set up like towards the front, and so they can get food and stuff like that. But also one of the things that they do during the course of this is that these tables, both individually and as like an almost like conference style kind of event, at some point of it, they'll go around and they'll speak to homeless people and figure out what their needs are so that they could improve the event in the future and make sure that it's constantly useful. Another similar example, and one that was actually, I believe, hosted by a lot of the same people. It's the Neighborhood Anarchist Collective, I believe, actually helped host another event also at the Methodist Church here fairly recently, was another homeless organization where they were working with city officials and local police, believe it or not, to try and figure out how they can best address the needs of like homeless people outside of like the share fairs and outside of things like the shelters and
Yep.
stuff like that. What is it that they actually need to get off the street? Because like our city has a huge homeless problem, and the city government admittedly can't handle it here. It's bad. Like right now, officially we have just over 1,000 people. The real number is, and I've spoken with people on this one, and it's the number the city doesn't want to hear and doesn't want to publish, is closer to 4,000 people in Eugene. Like we have per capita more homeless people here than like any other place, and most of these people are local. They're not coming in from the rest of the country like what is often claimed. These people are local. They if they did come here, they came from Florence or they came from Bend or someplace generally within 80 miles is about the radius. That's generally about as far as most of the people travel to Eugene. What they discovered was the fucking obvious thing that every time the city clamps down on homeless people here, it makes the problem worse. For instance, like when the city was like, oh, what if we encourage businesses to privatize their bathrooms? Well, now we
Yeah.
just have people shitting on the street. This wasn't a problem a year ago, by the way, or 2 years ago. It definitely wasn't a problem when I moved here. But there are places I mean, I've literally seen feces on the street, and it's because the city government encouraged these businesses to do this. And so, like, when they had this conference, and the homeless people were like, "Well, we do this
Yep.
because there's no place to shit,"
Of
and like,
course. Yeah.
and they look over at the police and they say, "Well," and the thing is like, and then I'm afraid that if I do go, in public, that guy's gonna arrest me, and I don't want to be arrested, and to be honest, like about half of the police that were there didn't even fucking want to deal with it anyway. I mean,
Yeah.
it's ridiculous, and so using mass line in that tactic where we get everybody in the group, everybody listens, everybody comes up with plans and says, okay, now we can go to the city and present something that might actually work. Now we can take all of these groups that were doing stuff and we can focus on providing
Yeah.
needs to people. One big thing here is like women's hygiene, for instance. That homeless women were getting arrested here for stealing things like tampons, and so the question is well, how can we prevent this from happening? And so what it is that there's an organization now that helps set women up with those hygienic care products now for free and doesn't charge them, so that they can go there and they can get what they need, and they don't have to worry about being arrested or being
Hmm.
assaulted or anything like that. Really, all of the best solutions that I have seen in this community have come out of using tactics such as the mass line, where it's working class people have sat down, discussed issues, and sometimes even discuss them with the people that we don't even want to deal with, because sometimes in the real world you have to sit down at the table with people you don't like. But the fact of the matter is all of our best solutions have came from this process. That the top down solutions provided by our city haven't been working.
No. So it must always be bottom up.
Right. And so I've seen it firsthand. And that's really what made me a believer in this process, was seeing it at the microcosm. And when I read this article, Like, this was the thing that came to mind. I was the fact that I've seen this before, but I didn't have a name for it, and I didn't really connect it with Mass Line, because I always thought that Mass Line was something that
Specific.
was more ephemeral and attached. Yeah, it was more attached to having like a vanguard party or something like that. And I think that a lot of anarchists kind of like that when they criticize a lot of like Maoist principles, especially Mass Line, they assume that there has to be an authoritarian top down, structure,
Which is far from the
behind it. And
case.
that's just not the case. When I actually have seen the process performed outside of that, that's when I started realizing, wait a second, no, this is actually something that's common that we just don't want to necessarily acknowledge. But if we stand behind it and we use this as a principle to unite, guide us, draft out plans, and take it to heart, I really think that we'll make a lot more progress. And that's true whether it's with unionizing a workplace, it's true whether or not it's providing homeless services for people in your city, figuring out what people need. It's true whether or not, let's say, like you want to go out and you want to create a red guard, and you got to figure out like what it is that people in your neighborhood do. Let's say like there's a food shortage or something in your, like affordable food shortage in your neighborhood because you live in like a food desert. Maybe you get out and you advocate for a community garden that can provide fresh fruits and vegetables to people that wouldn't normally ordinarily get them. I mean, and you would use the Mass Line in figuring out how to try and organize that, to try and use the resources that you have to address the needs of the people. And that's what this is about. It's a scientific process. It's not in itself an organization. And that's one of the reasons why I like to say, like, a lot, like Marxism is a science, and we need to use it as a science. And we need to use Marxism as a tool to not only make critiques outside, but inside, and improve
because it's really needed.
leftist thought. It really is. I think that there's a lot that's missing within leftist thought. There's a lot here that I'm not going to say missing, but there's a lot of misunderstanding behind it. Even I get things wrong like a lot. I'm not gonna lie. But if we are to improve things, and if we are to improve theory, then we need to make it a scientific process, and this is where it starts. And even the Mass Line itself, because of how it works and how it processes, we can fine-tune the process. So maybe in the future, we come up with an even better version of this through using it and improving it, through observing it in the past. Because that's actually really how Mass Line came about. It came about initially through Mao in Maoism, but the Mass Line that was practiced under Mao is different than the Mass Line that's practiced today and taught about today, simply because we've had 50, 60, 70 years of development. And that's what's important. That's what's always important to understand within leftism, is that theory is always changing and always improving. And so with that, we want to close for tonight. It's getting not really pretty late for me, but it's pretty late for you, isn't it?
As always.
As always. Well, sometimes it's early for you. It depends on when we do the show, but now we're doing it.
It depends what you mean by early.
It's midday for me. It's late for you. We're going to take off for this week. I'm hoping to put out a show more often. It's just we kind of got stuck in production hell this week, if you can't tell. It happens. Yeah. Somebody gets sick, and then the whole dominoes fall. Next thing you know, it's like a month out, and it sucks sometimes. I'll be real. But if you do enjoy what we do, if you want to support us a little bit, throw us a few dollars here or there or whatever. We do have a Patreon, which you can check out. However, if you really do want to follow us, check us out on Twitter. Follow us at Enceladus1. If you want to support the Federation networks, you can find me at KitsuneFlame at snouts.online. And you are...
I am Dark Whiskey, I believe, at snouts.online.
All right, and that's actually a Federation social network just for furries. But if you're not in the furries, you could join another, not Discord, you could join another Mastodon server that does cater to your interests, and you probably can still talk to us. So
and it's
hey,
on Twitter.
Give us and yeah, we're both on Twitter too. So we have that.
Garbage. That's the
Twitter
difference.
is Twitter's garbage, and if you use it, I'm sorry. I use it too. All right. Well, good night, everybody, and solidarity.
Solidarity.